welcome to AT&T ThreatTraq for May 7th, 2013. This program provides network security highlights, discussion, and countermeasures for cyber threats. I'm joined today by John Markley and Jim Clausing, and I'm John Hogoboom, of course. So starting off our stories today, I think we have Jim. You have a story about some Internet Explorer zero-day attacks that have been going on?
Yeah, this one came to our attention late last week sometime. Reports that the Department of Labor website, a particular page on the Department of Labor's website here in the U.S. was redirecting folks to malware. And it turns out this was a watering hole attack. We've talked about those in the past. This particular one was exploiting a zero-day vulnerability in Internet Explorer 8. Since then, we've discovered that this seems to be, additional news stories are reporting that this seems to be targeting energy sector workers, nuclear energy workers, that kind of thing. And it seems to have affected some additional websites beyond just the Department of Labor one. It's kind of interesting. This particular zero-day, as I said, only affects IE8. It doesn't affect 6 or 7 or 9 or 10, are the 5 versions of Internet Explorer that we see out there these days. So at the moment, I'm not aware of any particular workarounds for this vulnerability. So if you're using IE8, you might want to use a different browser for the time being. And no word yet from Microsoft on when they might patch this. Probably not in the monthly patches that are coming next week.
And we've seen a lot of times, right, that with some of these major IE vulnerabilities that they'll patch out a cycle, right? It seems to be their operation will take care of it a little quicker.
If it's widespread enough and serious enough, they could go out of cycle. But being that it was just discovered last week, it's unlikely that it would be packaged up and ready to go with the regular cycle patch cluster next week. I could be wrong, but yeah. So, and there's a Metasploit module apparently already out there. I haven't taken a look at it yet. I just saw this morning that there's a Metasploit module that exploits this. So, unfortunately, it means that if other bad guys didn't already have their hands on the exploit, it's available. So, as I said, if you're using IE8, you might want to think about running that on an isolated machine and/or using another browser for the time being, unless somebody comes up with a workaround, which I haven't seen yet.
And so they use this IE8 drive-by exploit to actually drop a different payload on the victims, visited this watering hole. I know that you and I had looked at some of this. It looks like it's Poison Ivy remote access Trojan that was dropped on the victim machines, at least in the Department of Labor case. That would kind of be in line with these advanced persistent threat type, cyber espionage type of actor sets. Not pointing any specific fingers, but that would generally be in their tool sets that they use. So interesting and not unexpected or not new, other than these particular targets being used as watering holes. So,
yeah, as I said, it looks to be targeted at energy sector type stuff. So that would, suggest APT type of actor going after that kind of data. So yeah, don't have any real insight into who's doing it or exactly why, but
we could probably take some educated guesses.
Yeah, well, we could sit here and make wild guesses all afternoon, too.
Okay, thanks for that story. And I guess, if you have IE8, like Jim said, take some precautions around what you're using with that. And I guess I think there was I saw some information about maybe disabling certain things like ActiveX or active scripting or something like that with IE8, but hopefully there'll be a package along, or a patch along soon. So the next story is also from Jim, a PDF tracking issue that I guess McAfee discovered. Is that the case?
Yeah, this was one that it first came to our attention. McAfee posted a blog entry on it. It was a feature that basically would allow folks who created a specifically crafted PDF file to track who was opening it, where they were opening it from, when they opened it, and Adobe didn't consider it a vulnerability initially, although some of the security vendors did, and they didn't necessarily think it was all that serious, but they have announced that it'll be patched in the upcoming patch release for Adobe Reader, which is scheduled for the 14th of May. And the workaround for it is to disable JavaScript in there for the time being. Basically, it was folks could craft a PDF that used the JavaScript API to pass some information to a website that could collect information on who was opening it and where and when.
So, in my mind, this is first of all, this is kind of gray area in terms of an exploit to me. Okay, yeah, they found something here, but it's very similar to what some people in the past have done with email, where they would send an email, and in there might be an image, but it's a very specifically crafted image that if you actually load the image in your email reader, you go and fetch that image, which lets the user know that sent the email that you actually got it. It's got like a special tag in there that's got your unique identifier in it to let you know that you specifically opened and read that email. So it's kind of similar in that respect. When you open this PDF up, it sounds like it's going to go back to some location and let them know that you actually opened the file and when and read it. But doesn't sound like it's dropping malware or anything on there from what I hear.
Yeah, that's my read of this is, there might be some information leakage as far as that, but agreed. It sounds a lot like those emails where they used images to try to track that kind of thing, and the solution to that one is read your email in plain text where you're not going and fetching those images. The solution to this one is to disable JavaScript so that API call doesn't ever actually get called.
Yeah, and we've seen some of these types of targeted attacks, though, where they're setting a stage, right? They want to say, hey, do I get this email? Did I actually reach the person I intended it to? Are they willing to open these files? It's the kind of precursor to maybe a later spear phishing or other type of an attack.
Right, definitely a means to kind of test the waters of a particular user population or even a very small one and see what they're willing to open and find out that kind of stuff. I think we've talked about PDF in the past, and we've said, if you can, disable JavaScript. We've said that probably 2 years or whenever we started this show. I think we've been mentioning that because JavaScript.
There's been a number of studies saying the same thing. I think CERT issued some alerts on that topic, and other big time government and industry agencies have said the same thing.
Right, and there have been other cases where PDF files with JavaScript inside have done far more interesting things than just check into a command and control. Like they'll actually fetch malware and drop it onto the machine via some exploit in Adobe Reader and whatnot. So disabling that JavaScript is a good idea, especially in your Adobe Reader, especially if you generally don't think it's needed. If most of your PDFs don't have any scripting in it, they shouldn't. Then it's probably a safe bet to disable it and only re-enable it when you actually need it on a particular type of document that might use that.
Yeah, and I'll come back to this in my top concern this week, but my ongoing issue with active content in documents. But before we get away from the Adobe PDF stuff, McAfee also posted the blog article yesterday, I guess, showing where they had done some analysis of some malicious PDFs that were exploiting a vulnerability that they had back in February. And the interesting thing about this one is they go through and show some examples of using stack pivoting to evade how this particular malicious PDF used stack pivoting to evade both depth, which is to prevent execution of code on the stack, and the ASLR, the address space layout randomization, which are some of the tools that OSs use to defend against malicious code being able to execute by knowing how programs are laid out in memory. I won't go into any detail on this, but it was a fascinating explanation of how this particular stack pivoting was used in this case. Technique that I wasn't really familiar with myself before. I mean, we've seen keep spraying and other kinds of attempts to be able to inject your malicious code elsewhere, but this stack pivoting was a technique I wasn't familiar with, so I want to recommend this to our listeners out there. If you want to know more about stack pivoting, I thought this was a really good article on that.
All right. Well, that's a good heads up for anybody, and I'm sure we'll put the links here for all our viewers to take a closer look at and dig into that one a little bit more. So a last story on your docket, Jim, is it sounds like websites are gradually getting better in terms of the number of vulnerabilities in them?
That's White Hat Security, which is a consulting firm, does annual reports on the state of website security. And their most recent one, they announced in a post on the 2nd of May. And the results of their survey seem to indicate that the websites are getting a little better, that they may not have as many vulnerabilities as they had in the past, or they're quicker to fix them. I have not read the entire report. There's the URL. There's a link to you have to register to get the entire report, and I haven't read it. I've only read their summary. One of the interesting things that jumped out at me in this summary, though, was the section that they labeled "Best Practices May Not Result in Better Security." And it was some interesting findings there. They said that 50% of organizations surveyed provide some amount of instructor or computer-based security training for their programmers. And in those sites, those organizations had 40% fewer vulnerabilities. Great. Resolved them 59% faster. Excellent. But exhibited a 12% lower remediation rate. And not sure what that one was all about. Then they also said that the folks that performed static code analysis actually experienced more vulnerabilities, resolved them slower, and had a lower remediation rate. And then sites that had the web application firewall also had more vulnerabilities, 11% more vulnerabilities, 8% slower to resolve them, and 7% slower remediation rate. And this just seems kind of odd to me, and I'm wondering if in those latter two cases it isn't the situation that they think that these are going to make them faster so they're a little more complacent, or make them safer so they're a little more complacent, and so they're not sure. It just seemed like an odd result to me. As I said, I have not read the full report yet, and maybe they dig into why they had some of these results, but I thought that was an interesting result.
Yeah, I'm completely guessing, but maybe the remediation rate is lower or slower because they're actually looking for more vulnerabilities, whereas before they didn't have any training, so things just, they weren't even looking. I'm completely guessing here, though. But, they might almost be creating more work for themselves. Not that it's a bad thing. They should be looking for security vulnerabilities, but once you get trained in that, you know how that gets. You can really get into a spiral of finding one thing that leads to another thing that uncovers a whole other big set of bugs, and when you're actually looking for things, you might be able to find more and thus have more work to do and maybe not get them fixed as quickly.
Well, yeah, you get it right. I mean, you hit it right on the head. I mean, we see, I think any site, any product's going to have security vulnerabilities, and it's like if you keep getting up on that soapbox and screaming and hollering, you're going to lose not only credibility, but you're just going to spend a lot of time. We got to get the, we don't want to diminish the awareness of security vulnerabilities by just clogging it up with all the stuff that we could find.
Right.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting, especially the web application firewall, which folks put that in front of their website to intercept the requests and try to protect against this kind of stuff. But that was one that made me think maybe people think that keeps them safe, so they don't worry quite as much about the backside. I don't know. It's just yes. It was an interesting result. So I hope to get a chance to read the entire report and see if they have any more detail on that or what the deal is. But that was the only. It looks like there's a lot of interesting stuff here. SQL injections have fallen out of the top 10%, or out of the top 10 rather, most frequently exploited vulnerabilities in websites. Other interesting stuff in here. So it's always interesting to see these reports and see whether we're improving as an industry or not.
All right. Good story, and it's encouraging. I'm all for developers in general of having good security background. I came from a development background, and not many people did from where I came. So, I'm all for, developers having a good foundation skill set and understanding, common security vulnerabilities especially. So it sounds like things are going that direction and improving in general with software packages, especially web-based ones. So that's good.
Yep.
So, John, you have a couple of stories here about malicious APK and a malicious APK delivered via email.
Yeah, kind of a new targeting mechanism, I guess, for exposure. Kaspersky Labs, which runs this blog site called SecureList, produced a report, and basically what they're saying, or what they discovered is that a Tibetan activist, identified, was kind of hacked, and his email address was accessed and used, and the phisher, the attacker, actually sent to all those addresses an APK file, which is an Android executable, so it's basically an Android app. And so that APK was malicious. And so if a user picked that up with their mobile device, like their Android phone, read their email and, clicked on that, which, we always say don't click on attachments. People do, and even myself. And so they click on that attachment, they installed that app, and it became, a malicious program installed on their device. A different attack mechanism, rather than having you go to a website or go to a store downloading the malicious app, they actually emailed it to this address list. And like I said, it's something kind of new. I mean, we've not seen that. We see malicious zips. We just talked about PDFs, right? We see executables, but APKs as actually malicious being delivered in this fashion is a new attack vector. And it lends us ourselves to that same, that credence we keep saying over and over again. Don't click on attachments unless you're really sure you know what they are. Kind of the funny, I guess not funny side of it, but it's the more of the interesting side of it is that we, as an industry, kind of going back to even the story Jim was just talking about, we tend to trust our secure mechanisms probably sometimes a little longer than we should, and in this particular case, APK files are probably not filtered by most common email spam filtering or control mechanisms. And so it's probably something, that we all need to look at is these executables that are intended for the devices. We may need to take a little closer look at them, just like we do with zips and PDFs and the other ones.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jim.
No, that's a good point. Our email antivirus and spam filtering, we look for lots of things, but you're right. APKs probably are not one of them, and right, they probably should be.
And there are equivalents for Windows too, right? There's equivalents. It's not just APKs, but there's also the equivalents in Windows phones and BlackBerries and whatnot as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I get, like you said, we pretty much have seen, the malicious actors trying to inject their apps, their APKs up into various stores, like the Google Marketplace or whatever it's called, and some of these other third-party stores. But I wasn't even aware that you could install an APK right from your email. So that's, that's an important thing to know. And I guess you're right. Users should know about that and be extremely cautious about opening any attachments in your email, much less a APK file, especially if you're on an Android phone. So, interesting story.
Yeah, and it isn't just on your desktop, on your laptop that you need to be concerned about opening these attachments. With so many of us having the ability to read our email on our mobile devices, don't open the attachment.
Yeah. I'll have to take a look through. We used to do some spam analysis of the spam that we see going through our various consumer spam email services that we have at AT&T, and be interested to see how many APK files are in there, if any. I don't remember ever seeing those back a year ago when we used to do that, but maybe I'll take a peek into there and see if we see any trend in that direction lately.
Well, the other question is whether they would be identified or whether they'd be classified as zips, because an APK is a zip.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it may require ourselves or another company maybe to create a new category.
Right. All right. So, John, you have the next story. And it sounds like a bird in the hand is just as vulnerable as two in the network or something like that?
Yeah, something like that, definitely, John. An interesting, series of stories have, crossed my desk lately. I mean, one of the things I do here at AT&T is really concentrate on mobile device security. And what I've really noticed in the last 6 months, a year, is so many of these attack vectors and so many of these vulnerabilities that are coming across require remote access. I mean, that's the whole key of it. But, typically they require remote access. But lately, the attack vector has seemed to be more of what can I hold in my hand? I got the device in my hand. Can I do something with it? And we've seen so many different things between ways of, unlocking a phone or simply to, load some malicious code or I mean, there just seems like a story almost, every couple of weeks about some way that, you can take over or subvert a device just by having it in your hand. So I think that as we progress, in like the last story, we're picking up our email, not on our desktops and our laptops. We're picking it up on the mobile devices. We're doing our banking and financial. A buddy of mine actually was at that ballpark the other day, and he was talking about that he doesn't do his bills anymore on his computer. He's using his phone to pay all his bills. And I'm sitting here thinking, okay, that's great, but did I just see you hand your phone to your son, to make a phone call, or somebody walks up and says, hey, my phone's not battery's dead, can I use it? And all those functions that we're doing and taking for granted, as on the device, it's another thing that we just have to consider. I mean, we wouldn't hand somebody, a stranger, our laptop and say, hey, go plug this in and start using it, and go pick up your email, but we would do that with our phone. And so, we leave the phones laying around, and we, not necessarily know where they're at all the time, like our keys. And so it's just something to recognize that the attack vectors, they'll probably limit it. I mean, it's not going to be like the thousands of hackers out there trying to break into your computer with spam and email and everything else. But it is something that somebody local might be able to compromise whether they intend to or not, just because they actually had the physical device in their hand.
Yeah, it's something that we've often said in the past that if the bad guys can get physical access to a computer, it's often game over. And these mobile devices are full-fledged computers, and that is a concern.
Well, and not only that, but I mean, you think about things that people push for nowadays, like with NFC. That they want to actually take their phone and walk up to the Coke machine or whatever, and swipe it and pay for something out of a vending machine. And that's the type of thing that we start taking for granted as secure. But I mean, we wouldn't hand a stranger our wallet. You wouldn't hand your purse to a stranger. But we do that with our phones all the time.
Right. So yeah, security around your phone, I agree. High priority, just as much, if not more, than your computer. In fact, mobile devices nowadays have just as much power and capability, if not more, than your regular computer, in terms of their accessibility to the internet and other, and to the mobile network for phone calls and whatnot, and the types of things we're doing on them in terms of, storing lots of personal information, using it for banking and whatnot, like you said. They might be more secure as long as you don't give it to somebody else to use. In terms of, a network communications path, less likely to get compromised with malware than your PC would be without you knowing it. But, one of the things about mobile devices that troubles me is it's very hard to tell what it's doing that I can't see on the network. Whereas with my PCs and whatnot, I can instrument things behind them to kind of track what they're doing. I could put antivirus on there. Even though we do have that with mobile devices, I'm not quite sure that, we're up to the same level that we are with the traditional machines. So, like you said, keep them secure. Don't let everybody touch and handle your phone, because you never know what they might put on there.
Yep, exactly.
And the other thing it kind of reminded me of when you're talking about, not that this is in the hand kind of thing, but I don't know if anybody else watches that Person of Interest show, but on that show, whatever technology they have, and again, this is TV, it's not real, but boy, via Bluetooth, bam, they're like hacking into people's phones and pairing with everybody's phones as they're walking down the street. Interesting exploitation of technology that I don't think is real, of course, it's a TV show, but it's one of those things kind of discussing that kind of scenario that your web phone or your mobile device might not be as secure as you think it is. All right. Thanks for that. And I guess we're going to move on to the Internet Weather Report. And let me bring up what we've got for the week here. So first slide we have here is we've got some increased scanning on 21 TCP FTP. So you can see we kind of have a base level of noise down here that comes and goes in the millions of scan flows per hour. But we've had some significant spikes over the past week here, up in the 3 million flows per hour versus looks like 10 million peaked out just yesterday. So the sources here, Canada, U.S., Russia, China, it's kind of dispersed. It's not a lot of them. I wanted to say maybe less than 10. But they appear to be looking for FTP servers and probably trying to brute force their way in. Purposes, you can probably just guess they might want to use it for whatever purpose of their own. It might be an exploit there. They could use it as an open file server that they could use for their own purposes, or there could be data there that they want to try to get off. So if you have an FTP server and it's exposed to the internet, be careful. I'd recommend you use SFTP via SSH, which is encrypted. FTP is not encrypted, but it's still pretty ubiquitous out there. A lot of people still use FTP for file transfers. So if you have a server out there that you use, make sure that it's got some protection, some instrumentation around who's using it, and auditing, and maybe filtering to only people who should be using it.
Yeah, one place where you still see a lot of it is web hosting.
Right.
You're using a web hosting setup. They often have folks upload their content via FTP.
Yep, that's true, and it's not encrypted, so your password goes across the wire clear text. Not that means that anybody can see it, but it has a much greater likelihood that it could. And there's a lot of vulnerabilities with various versions of FTP, and I'm sure that, there's probably cases where they're either looking for outdated versions that could be exploited because there's various versions of FTP server daemons out there that run, as well as just brute forcing their way in with some common login IDs and passwords. So, but you're right, web hosts, they do tend to use that still for their customers because I guess people are familiar with that, and it's an easy way to upload their website pages up to the web server.
Right, and FTP clients, most systems have them where they don't necessarily have an SFTP client.
Right, that's a good point. Next one we have is, and I think we talked about this before, we've got some scanning, I say diminishing scanning on 5038 TCP. This is Asterisk, which is the voice over IP PBX conferencing bridge software. This is their configuration port for like administration, and we had a much larger spike a few weeks ago back on April 24th that I'm pretty sure we probably reported on as well back then. And we're still seeing some intermittent, not as large spikes, but still some spikes here of activity. Most of it's coming from various sources: Indonesia, Iran, Mexico, U.S. And so if you're running Asterisk, keep an eye out for any activity that might be going there, especially not just for activity on this port, but look for any activity on your regular SIP port. I think it's 5060 UDP. You'd want to look for any kinds of brute forcing against that, trying to enumerate extensions and passwords to get into those extensions. We know that there's a lot of VoIP scanning, brute forcing activity that goes on in general, so make sure your VoIP PBXs are secure. And then we talked about this last week, and we're just going to look at it again. Still don't have an explanation for this. But as you can see, right around 4:27, late in the day, or maybe 4:28, can't tell exactly, of April, there's a very small number of sources in China, again, less than 10. They are scanning various ports here, 40,601, 603, and 605. That's represented, the purple here is the 4601, and then the orange is 4605, and then there's some more red stuff in here that's 4606, 4603. Now, they also were scanning on, let's see what this green is here, 4607 for a part of time here, and 4602 is the kind of aqua color. So apparently they didn't do that for an extended period of time, only about 2 days each or a day each for those other two ports. But there's been extended ongoing for 40,601, 603, and 605 TCP. Don't really know what this is. It's obviously related to each other because there was nothing prior to this. When you look back in time, we had no scanning activity whatsoever prior to this date, and then it all started on these ports around the same time. So don't have an answer what it is. If anybody out there has an idea what this is, we'd be glad to hear your theories or information that you might have on it. But right now, don't have any good idea. I know last time we kind of mentioned possibly peer-to-peer. I don't think that's the case, only because it's just too small of a number of hosts involved here. Usually you'd see a much larger number of machines involved if it was a peer-to-peer protocol going on. So I don't know. We'll leave it at that. Hopefully we'll keep an eye on it as the activity continues, and maybe we'll get some more information to explain what it is. And the top 10 most probed ports. No real news stories here. Again, 445 TCP is always our top dog. That could be latent config infections out there that are continuing to scan the world like crazy, as well as other botnets that also scan for that particular port and protocol in order to exploit whatever it was, MS-12086 or MS-08067 or something like that. I can't remember. It's been a while now. And then we also have our zero-access ones, which are the 16,000, 464, and 471 UDP. That's botnet related. That's the peer-to-peer protocol related to that zero-access botnet that we've talked about quite a bit. 1433 TCP, that's Microsoft SQL Server. 23 TCP, Telnet. 22 is SSH. 3389 is RDP. And 5900 BNC. All of those are probably brute force scanning, most likely. The 1433, maybe not, but a lot of the Telnet, SSH, Remote Desktop Protocol, VNC are all remote access types of protocols where they're trying to brute force their way into your machine or into anything running those software programs, and then they'll have very low-level access to the machine so that they can do whatever they want on there. And then 8080 TCP, I think we probably identified that might be Tomcat, although I think it might be 8081, but it's probably related to some web, alternate web type of port. It's probably related to some administration panel of some software. A lot of software packages, web-based software packages, use port 8080 as an alternate port. Some even use it as a proxy, so it could be scanning for proxies as well. And that's what that chart looks like. In terms of the most sources probing, so the previous one was, if you ignored how many people were doing the scanning, just total of scan activity. That was the previous chart. This is the one that's saying, in terms of the most people doing scanning or most unique source IPs doing it, what are they doing en masse? So you can see that zero access bots kind of show up here a little more strongly because there's a lot more zero access bots out there, up in the hundreds of thousands or maybe 150,000, something like that. I can't remember now. So there's a lot of distinct sources engaged in that activity. Again, that's their peer-to-peer protocol. And then, again, not surprising, 445 TCP is always in the top spot. And some of this ICMP stuff is probably not security related, could be backscatter from connection attempts that have been tried and whatnot, or just probing to see if a machine's up and whatnot. Telnet, again, we see that a lot. A lot of times that's targeted at your home routers. A lot of home routers still, or various embedded devices like that, still use Telnet as an administration interface instead of SSH, so that could be that. And then 3389 TCP is the remote desktop protocol. I suspect this might show up here in terms of the number of SIPs involved here because, there's a worm that's been around for a couple of years now, Mordo, might contribute to the fact of having a large number of sources engaged in remote desktop protocol scanning. But it is scanned a lot in general anyway. And with that, actually we've got top concerns. So I don't have any particular myself, but I think, John, you had a top concern for your week, for this week?
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting story. The last time I was on the program, I talked about, Wi-Fi hotspots on your phone or your mobile device and sharing that password. Happened to run into a personal experience just this weekend with my son, who was here at the house with some friends of his. And I was out actually shopping for comic books at the time because it was free comic book day, right? And the interesting text I got from my son saying, "Hey, what's our Wi-Fi password at home?" And I'm sitting here thinking, well, every acceptable device on my home network already has that in there. So what it is, so I gave him a call and I asked him. I said, "Hey, why do you need this? Did you lose the configuration? Did some device go down? What's up?" He said, No, my friend is here and he wants to play a game with me and he's brought his laptop and he needs that password to get onto our network. And I'm sitting there thinking, boy, I've just torn. He says, first off, I didn't want to say it over the phone in a public place. And then secondly, it's like, do I really want to share this? Obviously trust the kid, trust the neighbors, whatever, but it's one of those things that just kind of gets you that goofy feeling that, am I allowing myself or somebody else, a stranger, to intrude into my home environment? So it kind of led, I think the last time I was on, we talked a little bit about this, and Brian may have mentioned that, you can have a guest network, and that allows you to do some more control. And I think that from those experiences that I've just recently seen, I think it's something I'm going to do personally is to set up a guest Wi-Fi network here at the house that I can turn on and off, or give the kids some ability to do that themselves, that maybe has more limited access, controlled by date, time, destinations, whatever. But it's probably not a bad suggestion for everyone to consider. How do I restrict either not just my liability, but just even bandwidth usage, so that I am in control of my own environment.
Yeah, and potentially to firewall it off from the rest of the machines in your house.
Yep.
Barely need them scanning your TV or whatever else.
Yeah. That's right. And Uverse and everything else is on the network now, right? We don't need them messing with the TV.
Yeah, TV. My TV and my Blu-ray player both are Wi-Fi connected. So yeah, those are things I worry about. So I've been thinking of doing exactly the same thing, and you've probably convinced me to do it sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I've already, for a long time now, I've had my home network segmented where I have kind of a thin, unprotected layer as the first layer, and then there's another firewall that's my inner layer that has, all the machines that I actually trust and know about. And then on this outer layer, that's the thin layer, I run a lot of my malware analysis and other things like that. But I haven't done the guest thing like you're saying. One of my suggestions would be, well, maybe you can turn on one of those Wi-Fi hotspot things and then have him put in his credit card number and you could charge him for it. How they have those kiosks. Not that you would do that, but would be funny.
Something to think about, yeah.
Actually, they have open source portals like that you can set up in your home network.
Yeah. So, Jim, top concerns for you for this week?
Yeah, I hinted at it earlier. My ongoing annoyance with active content in documents. Everybody wants their flashy stuff, and I just want the documents to, give me the information I need. I don't need all kinds of flashy graphics. I don't need executable content in my PDFs. I don't need executable content in my, image file formats. Going back to the GDI thing that had, 6-7 years ago now, icon format or an image format had the ability to have executable content in it. Just makes my life so much more difficult as a security guy to secure things when people keep adding the ability to dynamically execute content inside of documents.
Right. Yeah, it lends ourselves, maybe it shows our age a little bit, but, I always think about that with websites. It's like, why can't I write a website in pure HTML? Why do I need JavaScripts and, all these other calls? I mean, I know it makes it look really pretty, but, boy, it was so much easier in the old days when you saw the text, you knew what you were getting.
Right. I'll take the flip side of this a little bit. I agree that I really don't want executable content in my documents. However, just this past month, I've been refinancing and for my home, and the bank has sent me PDF format files that, it actually has JavaScript in it to fill in the various forms, and it has the ability to drag and drop a signature from an image, so I could just kind of electronically sign all these things and then save it once I'm done and send it back to them. I kind of actually like that, because that way it prevented me from having to print the thing out, fill everything in by hand, sign it, and then rescan the thing, send it back to them, or try to fax it to them, because I don't actually have a fax. I do everything email. So in that respect, I actually kind of like that feature. But in general, I agree with you. I don't like scripting languages inside my documents because I worry about them. But I guess when it's a trusted person, I felt a little bit better about it. So.
Yeah, well, maybe got this gray here for a reason. Maybe I've just been doing this too long.
All right, good concerns, guys. Always good discussion. So that's our show for today. And if you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email us at threattrak@list.att.com. You can also find us on Twitter at the keyword @ThreatTraq. And ThreatTraq video is also available at att.com/ThreatTraq and on YouTube. And you can subscribe to our audio-only feed on iTunes. Just search for the word ThreatTraq. And thanks for joining us today. Thanks, John and Jim. And we'll be back next week with a new episode. Until then, keep your network safe.